Hi, Tony from All the Remote Things back again today. And I've got a great pleasure today to have Bob Galen on the cast with me. How are you, Bob?
I'm doing great, Tony. I'm glad to be here. I'm excited. It's early morning your time. It's an evening my time. I've had way too much coffee late in the day, so I'm primed and ready to go.
Oh, excellent. Bob, can you introduce yourself to everybody? I've known of you and known you for a long time, but it'd be great for everybody to hear where you come from and what you've been doing.
Sure. Everyone, I'm nice to meet you. Thanks for coming. I'm Bob Galen. I'm an Agile coach. I live in North Carolina, in the U.S. Been involved in Agile for maybe 25 years. I started out as a leader, leader, senior leader, dabbling with Agile organizationally, and then over the years, I've written a few books. 10 years ago or so, I moved to independent consulting, and I've been doing that ever since. I make my living coaching as opposed to training, so I do a bunch of training, but what really resonates with me is a lot of coaching. I'm a pretty active Agile coach, and if I resonate in one direction, it's leadership. I get really excited about coaching up. Some people aren't that, but I enjoy coaching leaders and organizations and things like that. And that's about it about me.
Yeah, really brilliant. I think you like many of us that were around back in that early period. You were doing what was agile before it was agile, and coaching before it was coaching, before it was actually named. I suspect. So, one of my questions for you is that sort of has become a real thing now. Agile coach. Um, what's your thoughts on the transition to it from this thing that we used to do to this thing that everybody names as agile coaching now?
Um, I think it's good and bad, I guess. I guess it's good that it's getting some recognition or it has a term and it has, a role in companies. I think the bad aspects of it is, and you know this, Tony, everyone's an agile coach nowadays. So in my view, everyone hangs out a shingle. And a lot of people hang that shingle out too early when they don't really have the experience and they don't really even have the self-awareness to know what they know and they don't know. Part of that is not. Part of that is because I think there's not a good definition still of what an agile coach is, and that's one of the reasons I. That was actually one of the primary reasons I wrote my recent book. Is I was trying to not solve a problem by myself, but at least enter into this problem space to define what good agile coaching looked like, because I don't think that's clear, not just for coaches, but for clients. I think it creates client confusion. When you're hiring a coach, what do you look for? Like the question of what does an agile coach do, and what don't they do? I don't know if there's clarity around the world in that space.
No, and I agree with you because if you look at it now, every person's tagging themselves as an agile coach, and I've had quite strong opinions that people have heard that many times that you know when I first started, I didn't even want to call myself an agile coach, right? Because I was just doing what I was doing, and
Yep.
this suddenly popped on. I still don't call myself an agile coach anymore, right? I'm just an agilist. There are all sorts of derivatives of it hanging out there now. You've got agile coach, enterprise coach, transformation coach, agile transformation coach, and I think that's created that massive confusion, which is one of the reasons I got you on. And you did a great segue there for me, because the reason I asked that question is you've written this great book. And I love the title of that book. I said that to you off. It was Extraordinarily Badass Agile Coaching. So talk to me a little bit about that, because I like the way that it's talked about and started to define what agile coaches really do.
So I wanted, and it goes back to what I was saying. I wanted to raise the bar, at least in the book. I wanted to talk about what excellent agile coaching looks like. It's equivalent to what does an excellent software development look like, or a developer look like. What does excellence? And it's not ever done. So you're not. One of the problems I have with folks who put that label out there is a lot of them aren't continuously improving themselves. So to me, part of being agile coach is walking your talk. Part of being badass is I'm continuously learning. I'm humble. I not only do I coach people, but do I have a coach? Do I mentor people? But am I being mentored? Is part of that sort of inside out job. So I think that's important for us to instead of coaching outward, coaching inwardly first. Are we walking our talk? Are we walking the principles? Do we have ethics and values? Not that we have to be perfect. Are we personally exhibiting continuous improvement? Scrum principles, we talk about courage. Are we exhibiting courage as coaches? Are we courageously having those crucial conversations, in our coaching journey, etc.? So I wanted to set a tone. I tried to do that in a book in a respectful way. The book is anchored on something called the Agile Coaching Growth Wheel. So there's a model out there that emerged from the community. It emerged from Scrum Alliance coach retreats, and I was aware of it when it emerged. And when I started writing the book, I'm like, I need to anchor it on something, and I wanted to look for something beyond the X-Wing model. And I found I was aware of the growth wheel, and it's still evolving nicely in the community. So the community's still sort of working on that, and I anchored it on that. And the nice part about that metaphor, Tony, is it's the wheel is well-rounded. So to me, part of being a badass is you're working to become a well-rounded coach. You don't just have one tool in your toolbox. Professional coaching. Another reason I wrote the book is, and you're aware of this, professional coaching very much, is sort of the hallmark is asking questions, right? And not advising a client, but asking powerful questions. And that's an anchor of professional coaching. And I've seen so many Agile coaches that's their only tool or their only stance.
Yes.
And it's not that it's a bad stance. People misinterpret me sometimes. They're like, "Oh, you're anti." No, I'm actually very pro professional coaching. I'm training myself. That's an area where I'm enriching. I'm learning myself, but it's not the only tool. Sometimes you have to step away from that and maybe be a consultant and provide advice, in the service to your client. So another, I think, the part of badassery is developing in a holistic way.
Yeah, I like that because, there's also the other part to that, I think, which is the question I really want to ask you, is there's also the coaching boundaries, which I think what I see in a lot of organizations, and I've seen it in new coaches, they step out of what I call the coaching boundaries and step into some of those things that perhaps we shouldn't step into, right? And, I became I understood early that there's a big difference between, say, for example, like life coaching or psychology versus agile coaching versus, operational design. What's your thoughts on that?
I think I agree with you. We're not counselors. We're not psychiatrists. So I think we need to. And again, it goes back to what is it and what is it not. I think even in the book, I don't know if I did a good enough job. There's these is and is not charts, or do or do not charts. And I could have probably done a better job of this is coaching. And then equally important or more important, this is not what we are. We're not there to muck around with families. We're not there to give it personal advice or marital advice or whatever. There's boundaries there that need to be established. They're hard to, I think sometimes they're hard. They're situationally hard because the spirit of most coaches is they want to help the client, whoever they're coaching. And it's hard not to step into that sometimes. So I think you have to be experienced in order to know to manage the boundaries effectively.
Yes, and I think there's also that within those boundaries, there's also that step change between, and you talk about coaching leaders and leadership. But there is a step change. There's a big step change from just from coaching agile teams and bringing them along the journey and coaching Scrum Masters to stepping into that next level of leadership and coaching leaders, right? And we were talking about a little bit about leadership and the training that you do. But that step into leadership for me, that's something you have to be really, really cognizant of how you're going to do that, because you can create a lot of angst and you can create some really bad organizational damage if you're not careful. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
I mean, I agree with you. And not just organizational damage, you can have personal damage. You can be immediately fired if you step. It's like stepping into landmines. You can be escorted to the door. So one of the things, I try not to prescribe it, but one of the things that's helped me coach leaders is to have been a leader. And to understand, to have empathy and to have understanding. and I talk to coaches. I try not to say in order to coach leaders, you have to have been a leader. I certainly think it helps me a lot. I've spent 20 years more in senior leadership roles. And so I understand, I have empathy for that. I have understanding. I've walked in those shoes. And I think doing that makes me a better coach. It certainly helps me connect to those clients. It helps me understand when to switch stances and to maybe go from, powerful questions to challenging them in some way, or calling them out, or providing advice, maybe options-based advice, partnering with them, uh, establishing trust with them, right? It helps with that. If a coach hasn't had that leadership experience, I think you have to, you know, like you have to get it somehow. So you can do, sort of leadership in the public sector, or do it with scouts, or coach a team or something. It's not the same, but go out there and get that perspective of what is it like to be a leader before we coach them. I think a lot of novice coaches, they coach leaders, and I've actually had sort of inexperienced agile coaches coach me as a leader, and the conversations are relatively obnoxious. They start telling, I'm not, oh,
Yeah.
that's not agile. They're
Oh,
talking
that's
down, they're marginalizing me. And I mean, I smile on the surface, I smile, but in my head, I'm like, you know, you don't, you know not what you're talking about. You're giving me this, I don't know, purest agile view of coaching, and you're not stepping into my domain, and it really isn't connecting with me. So I think when you're coaching leaders, you have to figure out how to step into that role and do a better job of connection, relationship building, empathy building, walking in their shoes somehow. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think I agree with what you're saying there, and there's probably one facet I add to that, because you actually mentioned it previous to that, and it was literally get mentoring, get yourself a mentor, or a coach as well. So if you can, and let's face it, the agile community is very open. So if I was to come to you, Bob, and say, you've been a leader, you've done leadership coaching, I'm just about to start that, can you help me? I know that you would reach out, right? And I think that's
Yep.
what I say to a lot of them when they're talking to me, because I've been doing it, of course, is I'm happy to give you my advice. Obviously, it's always contextual to the organizations that you work with, but at least having somebody you can bounce off of, you can ask the directions, and not fall into some of those pitfalls. So I really like
I
that.
I agree with you. Remember, I was talking about that inside out job? One of my questions for coaches, I think every coach should be being coached. Are you coach, and not just have someone who's coaching you, but are you coachable? I mean, are you internalizing what you're hearing in those coaching sessions? So you should have at least one coach. I'd prefer, multiple, two. Either pay for it or don't pay for it. Ask someone in the community. The community's pretty friendly. And then, are you mentoring and are you being mentored? There's always someone who has more experience than you have, and it could be the same person, coach and mentor. But are you going in both directions? Tony, I learn. So part of what's in it for me when I'm coaching people or mentoring people, I learn from every coaching session something
Yeah,
for me.
yeah,
Every mentoring session. I mean, I have a little reflection after every section. I'm a reflection junkie, and I reflect for a few minutes. And I always have something that I jot down for me, like a note to me or a growth point for me. So I think you have to do those things in order to grow yourself.
yeah. I agree with you, and I guess that leads me to, and I know this is the one that it gets everybody, but certification, and certified training courses probably haven't helped our cause in many ways. Now, that's not to say that they're bad, because when I say that, people immediately go, "Oh, you don't care about that," and that's not what I'm saying. But it has led to the rise of what I call the $100 coach, right? Just because you've done the training course and you got the piece of paper, or you've done the leadership training course, or you've done Cal or whatever that might be, you
Yep.
still need that mentor, or you still need somebody who can help you translate what you've learned into the real world, is my opinion. What's your thoughts on that, Bob?
Well, when I took an ORSC, an ORSC, organizational relationship system coaching series of classes. I was building up again, I try to walk my talk. So I was building up my professional coaching stance, and it was composed of 5 classes, like 2 or 3 days each. And we would practice probably in each class. We would practice 50% of the time coaching, scenario-based coaching. And then there was a 9-month cohort after that that I joined to get certification. And in the cohort, we did even more practice, and there was peer-to-peer coaching and peer-to-peer accountability and peer-to-peer learning, and then instructor-led learning. And that whole series opened my eyes to say, you know what, in order to become a professional, something that's has breadth and depth, like coaching, like agile coaching, a class is not good enough. A 2-day, 3-day,
Yeah.
4-day, 5-day class, it's not good enough. And in this whole notion of practice, and I don't care, but you have to practice your craft, and you have to, and peer feedback, like in the classes, masters. So the instructors would give some coaching feedback based on scenarios, and it was very valuable, and it was harsh sometimes, and you had to take that feedback and figure out what to do with it. And then there was peer-to-peer feedback, and then there was personal reflection feedback. So that's how you get better, from my point of view, right? That's agile. That's part of that iteration. So it's not that I'm anti-class. I'm starting to, or certification class, I'm starting to become for coaching. Maybe for other things you can get by, but for coaching, you need something bigger and deeper and longer. And I don't see a lot of those. There's some of those, but not a lot.
Yeah, you said two things there that I really want to dig a little bit deeper on. The first is you said it's a craft, and I think that that's something that gets ignored in the certification mill, right? What we're
Yep.
doing is actually a craft, and we need to treat it as any kind of craft you would. You have an apprenticeship, you have a learning phase, and then you have that phase where you're moving into it. Thoughts?
Yep. I agree. I agree with that. And it's that you said apprenticeship, and I love that model of, and it dovetails with the mentoring that you were talking about, right? You're learning from master. So it's you're learning from master craftspeople, master coaches, not triggering on master, and they're not telling you what to do. What I loved in these classes is the master coaches would show you. So
Yes.
they would be, so it's modeling. It's not just telling you to read this or letting you, so they would show you, and then how to get, and that's their style, and then you would adapt it to your style, because there's no recipe. We just are improving our skills over time.
Yeah, I like that. The other one that you mentioned in there, which is a great segue, is breadth of coaching. So we've talked a bit about the leadership coaching and coaching of agility, but there are other facets to that for us as coaches in this modern world. Um, so let's talk about building quality in, or testing as such, right? We often get called into that, and the first book that I ever read of yours was Agile Quality and Testing, and the pillars, and we'll talk about that in a second. But I think that book is still as relevant today as it was when you first put that book out, right? And my reasoning around that whole situation is because at the speed of the way organizations are working now and moving, and agile itself creates this ability to deliver, very quickly. That puts a lot of pressure on the quality and testing, and it gets left behind. So I think there's a beholding thing on us as coaches to understand that, and often a lot of coaches don't. What's your thoughts on that?
I mean, one of the things in my journey, so years ago, before I was, probably before I was in Agile, probably not before there were Agile ideas out there, but someone made the mistake of assigning a large QA. So I was a developer and a development leader, software development and engineering leader. And then someone made the mistake of assigning like 50 testers to me. So they did a reorg, and they said, "Here, now you own these testers." And I'm like, I don't have a clue about. I mean, I did unit testing and things like that, so I wasn't clueless, but I didn't know anything about really formal testing. So then I sent myself to a class by Ross Collard. If you ever heard that name, I don't think he's with us anymore. He was from New Zealand, and he was a rock star in fundamental testing. Kem Kaner hung out with him. James Bach hung out with him. And I ran myself through this, and my head just exploded in the class. And it's funny, Tony, I was the only developer in this room full of testers. So when they were asking people what they did, I didn't have the courage to identify myself as a developer, right? I made something up. I'm like, I'm a technical architecture tester or something like that, because there was this division, right? There wasn't a lot of love between developers and testers back at the time. But I really tried to become a student of what I think of as professional testing. And what I learned is it's incredibly nuanced. It's deep and broad. It's just as challenging as development, but I don't think people really respect it that way. And that opened my eyes, and I became a better leader of testers and developers. But I also became more well-rounded as an engineer, the way I felt it. And that's actually done me a good service from an SDLC perspective.
Yeah,
If you recognize those letters,
I do.
it's really helped me to become a more well-rounded coach, I think, as well. I wish more coaches understood. Sometimes in Agile we trivialize the flows and the development life cycles and things. I think becoming a student of those things a little bit can help you even in these Agile life cycles and these different models.
Yes, and let's talk about the pillars. Let's talk about the pillars. So, talk to me a little bit how they came about, and how people can leverage that.
Well, the way the pillars surfaced, the genesis story for that book was I went into a very large, who will remain nameless, financial firm here in the States, an international financial firm, and they just invited me in because I'm in this area, and they're like, oh, they were really proud of their Agile, and they were showing it off, and they had about 100 teams, and they were doing instrumentation of cucumber tests and things like that. So acceptance test driven development and unit test driven development. And they had all of these monitors and all of these tests and things like that clicking. And I went around one day and I'm like, oh my gosh, these guys are really advanced. And then they invited me into a backlog refinement session. And I'm like, oh, great, this is going to be, I mean, if they're doing acceptance tests, these guys must be able to tell user stories. User stories must pop out of their mouths. Like perfect user stories must be just cascading out of their mouths. So I'm just sitting in the corner of this refinement meeting room, and these folks couldn't write a story to save their life, and they couldn't write acceptance criteria. And I put two and two together, and I was like, well, what the hell are they automating out there if they can't write acceptance tests, right, or criteria for the stories? And the idea was they were writing the acceptance tests for just whatever they felt like instrumenting. They were getting measured by the amount of coverage or the amount of test execution, and it wasn't the quality. And so so what emerged from that, I'm like, oh, how do I communicate to these folks? And again, I wasn't getting paid, but I wanted to help them. I'm like, oh my God, these folks are broken. They don't understand quality. So their view of quality was the automation, the technology part. But what I wanted to talk to them about, I said, there's two other pillars that I want you to focus on. There's good old solid testing practices, right? Like planning.
Yep.
Planning. And then I said there's these collaborative people-based practices like story writing. It's not just about writing the story, but it's about customer value. It's about, connecting the dots between what we produce to the customer and the value proposition and validating it and the conversations that it creates. So the pillars emerged from that as a way of, they were heavily invested in tech, but they were missing two of the pillars, and their quality proposition was all askew. And I still think today, I don't see, and they were ignoring all of this history of quality practices. Like, we're Agile, we don't do any stinking test planning. And I'm like, I don't know if that's the right thing to do in all contexts. Like there's nothing wrong with a little bit of planning from a testing point of view in a team. It might be nice to put that as an entire team, not just as the testers. So it was imbalanced, and the pillars are intending to try to influence people to get a little bit more balanced in their thinking.
And the reason I say that the concepts in the book and the pillars are as relevant today as they were yesterday, so to speak, is because we're still seeing that thing, right? And
absolutely,
it's caused by organizational constructs sometimes. It's also caused by the fact that developers tend to not see that they're responsible for quality as well sometimes. And I'm not saying all developers, please don't flood me with that, but we do see that. And the other one is interesting. It's what they're measured on. So quite rightly, so that's not inherently always their fault. That's coming from the enterprise itself, right? So, for example, you picked my favorite one. I still see that today. Test coverage. Oh, I've got 100% test coverage. Great. How come you've got 37 issues coming out of that particular? Well, my point is that you can have coverage. Where's your quality, right?
Exactly. Or you can have automation, but is everything passing?
Yeah.
Or is it all failing? Or are you commenting out test cases because you don't want? So it's like you're not investing. I actually think I'm going to say something maybe that's controversial. You may not like it. I don't know. But I think Agile has really undermined quality in some ways at a very large level. I think it's diminished it. There's still divisions. Even though we put testers and developers, we try to have SDETs and we try to blend the roles and we try to blend the mindset, and quality is everyone's job. If quality is everyone's job, sometimes it's nobody's job. So I do think, traditional testing as a profession, as a craft, it had issues, but I think we've almost, as we adopted Agile, we tried to ignore a lot of that learning, and we didn't carry enough of it through, and it really disappoints me. And I think it does haunt us to this day.
Oh, you say it's controversial, but I normally, if it was controversial, I would say something. But I agree with you, and the reason that I agree with you in that is the factor that with a lot of coaching, which goes back to what we were just talking about, right? Focuses on creating the agile environment for the teams, creates on the agility up and down the stack, and then doesn't look at those practices and doesn't look at those processes that underpin the ability to create your agility, right?
Absolutely.
And that's where I see, again, it's that craft. We have to have the craft enough. Do we need to know everything about software test engineering? Probably not. Do we know enough to know that these are the things that should be being done to enable the ability of the teams, right?
Absolutely. Well, part of that, going back to that Ross Collard class, he talked about functional testing and then non-functional testing. And my head blew. I'm like, what do you mean non-functional? Because my view of testing historically had been functional testing. And he's like, well, there's non-functional. Are you looking at maintainability, the ilities? Are you looking at performance? Are you looking at reliability? Are you looking at, sort of cross environment testing? And I'm like, oh, I hadn't thought about that. And I hadn't thought about that. And I hadn't thought about that. And so testing has, when I say it has nuance. Security testing,
Yeah,
right? Usability testing.
correct.
Right. And I'm not saying we have to take forever to do the testing, but testing is not this narrow thing that a lot of people think it is. There's a lot of breadth to it, depending on your business domain.
Yeah, and I think some of the language has hurt us a little bit too. So I really have, I don't like quality assurances as a statement. So for me, the way I talk about it, it's quality assistance, right? It's everybody's job to assist in creating quality.
Absolutely. Now, one of the things that the 3 pillars did do when and people, I don't think, so I agree with you, that's still valid today. I don't know if the book got the traction that I had hoped for it. It got some. I still hear people adopting it, but the folks that really read the book, I think it widened some eyes. So I wish, it's not about the book, it's about widening the eyes a little bit. The other thing about that book is it wasn't just for testers. It was a whole team view. And I was also trying to talk to leaders. It's like, leaders, open your eyes a little bit and think about testing and think about quality a bit differently, even in Agile contexts.
Well, I can tell you from my part, it's still one of those books that I recommend people read. So you certainly got traction with me, if no one else.
I appreciate that.
I want to take a little bit of a turn there, but it links into everything we're talking about. And you did write a book, Scrum Product Ownership, some time ago, and I'd read that. But I want to talk about product ownership. I want to talk about that from the point of view and your view of it, because it's one of the things that I see traversing organizations all over the world now, that it's misunderstood, or product owners are either disenabled, it's in name only, or they don't actually understand what product ownership in its essence means. What are you seeing, and how are you dealing with that?
I mean, the driver for the book, I started writing the first edition of that book in 2007-ish, 6, 7. I was a leader in an organization, and the guidance around product owner at the time was very minimal out in the community. It was like a couple pages in the Scrum, if there even was a Scrum guide at the time. And I was like, the product owners are struggling. And I wanted to try to provide some guidance for our product owners, or just what I was seeing. And it was this, like, what is the role, right? It's what's the role? What does good look like? It's the same thing that drove the coaching, and there was a gap in that. So that's what 2000. So 2007-ish, I started writing it. 2009, I published the first edition. What is that? 19 over 10 years later.
Yeah, correct.
Unfortunately, there's probably more confusion, unfortunately, around the role today than there was. Now, there's a lot more material now, descriptions, there's webinars, there's multiple books, etc. But I still think in the real world, there's confusion. You put your finger on what I think is, to me, is the number one problem is empowered product owners. I encounter so many, I can't even tell you how many product owners I encounter that they're in that role, but they're not trusted. They're not empowered. They're not I use the term activated. They're
Yes.
not activated as product owners, and the organization is not activating them. And it just breaks my heart, Tony.
And I wonder if that, so I have a theory that's intrinsically linked to the leadership coaching that we're talking about, because part of enabling and empowering, or activating, I like that word, activating the product owners, is that is actually a transference of leadership that's normally held on to. So we, David Marquez popularized intent-based leadership, whatever you want to call it, which, I've talked to David about it. Literally, that to do that, you have to give them the ability to do and be powerful in their craft. But if you're not, then as a leader, you've created that issue.
I agree with you 100%. When I was at a company that I spent a lot of time in and I was proud of as a leader and as an internal coach, but a leader, is eye contact. And in eye contact, I trusted the product owners, even when it was hard as a leader, even when I disagreed with their opinion. I had to so I had a choice as a leader. I either supported them fully and empowered them and trusted their judgment and gave them opinions, but the final decisions were theirs, or I needed to fire them if I didn't trust them. If I didn't think they were doing, not that I'm trying to make it sound brutal, and if firing wasn't the point, but it's either, if you don't trust them, then get someone else in that role. But whoever's in that role, you have to give them, even when it's tough, even when the crap is hitting the fan, even when there's external pressure, they are the product owner. And I really looked at them. I looked at them as mini general managers of their product, of their backlog. They were the GM.
Yes.
They had and as a leader, and it wasn't just me, Tony, it was every leader in our organization needed to empower, truly empower, and look at the product owners that way. And we did that. We weren't perfect, but we largely did that. And what happened is the results were outstanding. Right. So to me, that's one of the secret sauce elements of high performance Agile, is empowering the PO, is really empowering that role to be what it can be.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. That's why I asked the question, because that's the one for me that I see in the Agile roles that we haven't really delved into deep enough and hard enough.
And coaching needs to, I mean, it's leadership coaching and helping leaders sort of make that pivot and make that trust pivot and that empowerment pivot. And it can't just be the words, it's every act. So it's all your behavior. You can't just say, I trust you, and then undermine the product owner.
Yeah. I trust you. Here are the guardrails, but
exactly.
I'm going to do this. Yeah. Look, so we are getting a little bit close to time. I want to ask a question just very quickly around. So obviously it is a remote cast, and one of the things around that we've talked about, all of these things we've talked about today, we used to do all that in physicality. now we've moved into this immense digitality of remote and hybrid. How are you seeing that being adopted? Because I've asked this of a few other Agilists on this cast, and one of the things is that I hear from a lot of people, oh, we have to be co-located and et cetera, et cetera. How do you see that all panning out now? Because I don't think it's going back to I know it's not going back to the way it was.
So my friend Josh Anderson and I do a podcast, the Metacast, and during COVID, even pre-COVID, a little bit pre-COVID, but for the last couple of years, occasionally we revisited this and we talked about it on the podcast and just privately. And it's sort of Josh was like, and I think we both came to the conclusion I think it's good for us. We have to work remotely. We have to be able to work virtually and to be effective. But at the same time, we were lamenting that there is this essence of Agile. Like back in the day, the essence of XP, there's something in my mind like an XP team around a table doing planning poker and moving cards around and doing release planning with physical cards and looking at each other and the customers there, and it's highly collaborative. There's something powerful about that, or ideating a problem and a solution, or doing some architectural discussion, or the testers and developers being right there talking about stuff, or doing iteration planning. And I think there's a secret sauce to that. So it's like, how do we get it to where we can do both of those things, where we can have vibrant, so whatever vibrant, remote performance and execution looks like. But I do think face to face is somehow I don't want to lose it. I think there's some magic in face to face. So I think there's this, how do we get the hybrid going, so that you do both of those things. I think COVID has forced us to lean so much into the remote that I worry about losing them. And it's the magic. And I don't think you can listen to me. I think what I would wish for everyone is to be part of a co-located team. Everyone should have a prerequisite of, in their history, having been part of a co-located team and realizing the magic of that. And maybe if you don't, maybe we create a boot camp or something, or a dojo where people can get the magic of a co-located team and then take that into remote execution so that you at least understand what the dynamics are.
Yeah, I think there's a balance and a mix in this hybrid and this remote, right? And obviously, I work for Remote Agility Framework, and that's one of the things that we really wanted to make sure is if you can't do this, and the other thing with it now is, of course, you have people spread all across the world working together, so it's not going to happen. Putting everybody
Right.
around. How can we? You hit the nail on the head, and that's one of the things. And I'm not here to spruik out stuff, but that's one of the things that we've been focusing on, right? Is really how can we evolve what we did in physicality to digitality, right? You cannot do it in the same way, but
Yep.
a lot of ways that we can do that. It's about designing it to the context of your organization and the way that your people want to work.
Real quickly, I had to pivot. I don't teach a lot of Agile classes, but I do teach a leadership class with the Scrum Alliance, a CAL class, and I've been doing that for a number of years. And I had to pivot it from physical class to virtual delivery. And I went to a class by Dan Mizik. I don't know if you know Dan,
Yeah.
but Dan was teaching. He was just teaching. So he was sharing some things in a class of what worked for him. And some of the things I picked up there is relationships. So not tools, not getting too mural bound or miro bound, but really having simple tools for virtual delivery of the classes, emphasizing like working together in meetup rooms and in meeting rooms and things like that, and really focusing on relationship, like cameras on and hand motions and holding things up. And I mirrored a lot of that in my class. And one of the things I've realized is that the relationships, I'm actually getting better class relationships during the class and after the class by being really attentive virtually, if that makes sense.
Yes.
And the feedback I'm getting from the classes is not that the numbers matter, but the feedback is better, the experiences by people is better, and I think there's a secret sauce of focus on relationship, focus on experience, focus on collaboration, and we focused so much on it in a virtual environment, and we were sort of maybe lazy about it in face-to-face and co-located and getting sharper about it, that I'm getting better results in my classes.
That's great to hear. Yeah, I totally agree. That's, you're singing my theme song, and a number of the other people that we work with. So that's fantastic. Bob, we've really reached the end of our time. It's been fantastic to have you on today, and as we could talk for many hours on this stuff. How can people get involved with you? How can they touch base with you on all of those things that we've talked about today?
The best way to get me is just probably I have two websites. I have a company, my company presence website, but the one that I'm most fond of is at a persona that I have called Agile Moose. So if everyone looks for Agile hyphen Moose, like the big animal, .com, that's a place, that's a soapbox place for me to post things about the books, about causes that I care for. If you want to reach out to me for coaching, there's a way to connect to me there for free coaching sessions and things like that. Just to explore coaching. So Agile-Moose is the best way.
Brilliant, brilliant, and we'll add that to the show notes as well. And believe me when I say that Bob will respond, because he always does. Look, it's been fantastic to have you on. For those listening, don't forget, if you want to keep this thing going, please like, subscribe. That would be fantastic. Join our remote community that we've created around Remote AF. It's just go to remoteaf.co and click the community button and join us. Bob's in that community, and we talk about all the remote things and all things remote. It's been fantastic having you on today, Bob.
Hey, Tony, real quickly, I just want to thank you for what you do in the community. I want to thank you and the team at Remote AF, and just you personally. You're a treasure in the community, and you give back a lot. So I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I don't know quite how to respond, but thank you, and everything that you do too, Bob. That's fantastic to have you on. Thank you for being here today.
My pleasure.